just felt like Mandela and Mbeki were trying to do more for South Africa than government now is able to do for them. That South African companies are now taking their produce, putting it on the back of a truck, going to the border with Mozambique, paying for an escort because it's a country in conflict, to get it to a South African-run private port. Grindrod is the company that runs that port, and paying for it to go on a ship there because that's more efficient than our ports. Just imagine the madness of, apart from the fact that South Africans are overburdened and cannot find work, and that the situation is getting worse year on year, and people are realizing they're going to be worse off than their parents because their houses are worth less than they were 5 years ago. That VAT, in my mind, is a symptom of a sick system.
Guys, if there has to be any national dialogue in South Africa, these kinds of discussions are the dialogue. I mean, if you watch the full interview between Sizwe Mpofu-Welch and this DA rep on finance, Mike Burke, you'll just be blown away. And it proves to me that truly the young Africans, and in the case of South Africa, the young South Africans really need to start raising their voices to sort of like bring solutions to the problems they see. We've been talking and talking and talking, enough of all the talk. We now have to start speaking solutions. And I think that's what Mike Burke tries to do in this video. Him and Sizwe Mpofu-Welch have this discussion along the line of solutions. And that's really important in today's South Africa, because there's lots and lots. When I listen to your comments, read your comments and all of that, too much is broken down. It's overwhelming for one president. Guys, just forget about the whole thing with President Ramaphosa. It's the whole rot is overwhelming. I mean, like, if you even try to consider the president of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, managing over 400 million plus people in Nigeria, that's crazy. But here in South Africa, we're still speaking about a 60 million large population, and yet there's an overwhelming series of problems that need to be sorted out, from crime to all kinds of issues. It's overwhelming. So right now, the level of discussions we should start having in terms of dialogue should be a solution-oriented kind of discussion, or solution-oriented discussions, and not discussions that just simply complain and complain. And so that's why I really appreciate this discussion, and I really encourage you guys to watch till the end. Mike Burke is actually tackling a lot of really important things, and for me it's really interesting that, you know, this is a perspective coming from the white South Africans. I've actually been looking for the young white South Africans like this to really speak to. I don't know if he's young anyway, Mike Burke, but I mean, like, when you see his demeanor and all of that, he seems to me as a technocrat. You see, technocrats are these guys who just, their job is just to get things done. They are not really into politics. In fact, he said that he just got into politics, I think last year or maybe 2 years ago, but he has been working in the private sector, and he's just a technocrat. The first time I got to learn about technocrats was during my PhD studies, when I was studying about what in Ghana was called the December 31st Revolution. Now, that revolution was a revolution by the former president of Ghana at the time, John Jerry Rawlings, who had gotten frustrated with the kind of democracy, just like the kind of democracy here in South Africa we are seeing, where Mbeki argues that the kind of democracy he's seen in South Africa is leaving South Africans disillusioned about the concept of democracy. This was the kind of problem Jerry Rawlings was seeing in the 1980s in Ghana, and he got frustrated with that kind of democracy. He called it, there was a term he used. He said that the kind of democracy in Ghana was a kind of democracy that was an abstract was a paper representation of abstract liberties. If I can say it again, Jerry Rawlings saw the problem of democracy in Ghana as a paper representation of abstract liberties. In other words, it was a liberty that was on paper, but it was abstract. People were not free. The common man was not able to be free to pursue the things that bring or lead him to his highest being or his highest wellness in society and all that. I think this is what governance should be. Governance should be all about creating an environment, a space for people to achieve their highest essence, their highest being, the highest quality of life. But we're not seeing that today in South Africa's democracy, if I listen to Mbeki correctly, and also all your comments on this channel. So Jerry Rawlings decided that he will carry out a military coup on December the 31st, 1981, and that coup, he would now enforce what he now called a participatory democracy that will bring the common man back into the decision-making processes of Ghana. Although there were lots of struggles in the way anyway, from 1982 to 1992. What we saw made Ghana then successful during this time was his adoption of technocrats, all right? So the structural adjustment program by the IMF and the World Bank, which is another story for another day anyway. But the structural adjustment programs were driven by technocrats in Ghana. These are Ghanaian economists, Ghanaian, intellectuals. They were just technocrats. They just studied the numbers, studied the statistics, just like as Mark Burke is actually explaining here. You see, when you listen to him, he speaks about the GDP, he speaks about the numbers, he speaks about the economic growth and all of that. Those are technocratic perspectives to government and planning. So these were the kind of guys Jerry Rawlings adopted, along with securocrat, what was called people who guarded his territory, because there were attempts at military coups to kick him out of power and all of that. And at the end of the day, by 1992-93, the World Bank actually started calling Ghana. In fact, they even called Ghana the Japan of Africa. There was a burgeoning East Asian kind of miracle that was about to be born in Ghana, because the macroeconomic indices were actually rising, because of the efficiency with which the macroeconomics of structural adjustment programs were being pushed by these technocrats, all right? So this is the kind of technocratic thinking I see Mark Burke speaking about here in this interview. Really interesting. I admonish you guys to watch to the end, because they don't speak only of the problems, they speak of the solution. He speaks about how he sees the value-added tax that Minister Gordon Guana was trying to push as a system, as a symptom of a sick system, all right? So it's not as if the VAT is going to solve anything, according to him, and he breaks it down with facts, back-to-back facts, on why the VAT in itself is the symptom of a problem. And one of the parts of this video I enjoyed, how he speaks about some of the things that former President Mbeki actually had running, that actually got the economy kicking off. He argues that during Mbeki's time, and I think even Mandela's time, the economy was growing by at 5%. But today we have an economy that is growing at 0.6%. And even if you take away AGOA, because according to him, he argues that many people think or argue that AGOA's removal will only affect 1% of GDP. But when you have an economy growing by 0.6%, 1% is enough to crash the economy. So he's speaking of a lot of facts and solutions in this video, which I think all South Africans need to sit back calmly, sit down and listen and understand. So this is the kind of national dialogue I would expect to see more among especially young people in South Africa. It's a national dialogue that speaks in solution terms and not one that speaks constantly of problems, all right? Of course, we have to describe these problems, but let's also start thinking creatively about solutions and how to circumvent these things, so that at the end of the day, we can have really productive discussions. So that's the goal here we're having on Kwazami. So let's quickly listen to this discussion between Mike Burke and Sizwe Mpofu-Welch. Really intellectual, really interesting, the kind of ones we like here on Kwazami. For me, I'm an intellectual, and this kind of things really almost in a way turns me on. But let's listen quickly and share your thoughts, guys, in the comments.
I was outside yesterday and talking to some people. I'll tell you what I saw. The first thing I saw, which I've seen a lot in this work, is the political bubble just making people fail to see the outside world. And I'm so shocked at how many MPs don't realize how opposed South Africans are to this tax increase. I'm like, your job is to know what people think. And you don't seem either to know, and if you do know and you don't care, I'm even more worried. So I saw a lot of that yesterday. But a lot of the smaller parties who voted, because it wasn't just Action SA, Rise, Bosa, as you said, Action SA, they think the ANC is going to come to the table and they're going to revise this VAT increase. And they say that if the ANC doesn't do that in this month, then Division of Revenue and Appropriations, they can always come back later and say, we're going to stop you there. Yeah. What do you think of that?
One has to almost manage your emotions so as to not lash out at the ridiculousness. The Mail-in Guardian, which is actually reported on this issue above their weight class, as they ran a front page black print, and it just said the toxic tax. That's what it's become in South Africa. But I think the reason it's become that, if you dig a layer deeper, is in any functional democracy, and it's a broad word, and I know it's also now got some weight to this concept of democracy, but in any ostensible functional democracy, trust in government is almost like the one thing you've got to keep managing.
Sure.
Because if that falls apart in a democracy, like your enforcement mechanisms are always temporary. It's based on trust, much like a bank, actually. Sure. It's all got to do with the perception of reliability. And some surveys are telling us that trust in government now is at 22%. There's trust in the private sector, and I'm not saying the private sector is right. In fact, one of my missions coming into Parliament from the private sector is to say I'm so hot full of white-collar crime in South Africa, pretending like that's not part of the problem, or to quantify that, they keep almost more than 70% of the revenue every year. Sure. And it's not like South Africa is improving massively. So where's that going?
Yeah.
But you've got a problem here. The trust in private sector is above 60%. Trust in government's 22%. And then you're increasing tax. But South Africans are telling you they don't trust you anymore. Yeah. So by implication, they don't trust what you'll do with the money.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's what South Africans are, apart from the fact that South Africans are overburdened and cannot find work. And that the situation is getting worse year on year, and people are realizing they're going to be worse off than their parents because their houses are worth less than they were 5 years ago.
Absolutely. And add to that, sorry, just to build on this, no one came to the electorate a few months ago to say, hey, by the way, one of our proposals is to raise tax.
Yeah.
At least if you told us in advance, we could be like, okay, I know it's going to be tough. But then you reduce trust when you're like, this is our program. And then once the election happens, you're like, actually turns out our program is the exact opposite.
So this is your challenge. There's nobody who's honest about that's the intention. You don't have trust in government. You want to increase taxes. South Africans are overburdened, but they're also at a level where they just won't give you anymore. And so even the mechanism that you're going to try and impose here will be circumvented. It won't be as effective as we think it'll be. But there's also another, perhaps more pernicious problem, Sizwe, and that is that I'm almost back to where I was before this election, that the ANC represents, and I can't tell you what proportion because it's not the whole organization, but it just feels to me again that the ANC is maintaining this, what South Africans lovingly call patronage network, but what I call sophisticated embezzlement. And that machine has to keep being fed more and more. And so that's actually, in my mind, what's happening here, and perhaps why I've spent so much energy fighting this thing, is to say that we have to start chipping back at that. We cannot keep pouring money into Transnet, which in our estimation is losing between R500 million and R1 billion every month. And that's just the fiscal cost. That's taxpayer money moving from, when people buy formula powder to contracts awarded at Transnet. It's almost, at this point, it's like there's a straight line. That's just the fiscal cost. But an organization, a behemoth entity like Transnet, I don't want to bore your audience, but an entity like that is getting in the way of efficient corridors for South Africa's produce. And so you've got the fiscal cost, but you also have an economic cost. And the economic cost is the missed opportunity, what's happening to our roads, the fact that South African companies are now taking their produce, putting it on the back of a truck, going to the border with Mozambique, paying for an escort because it's a country in conflict, to get it to a South African-run private port. Grindrod is the company that runs that port, and paying for it to go on a ship there because that's more efficient than our ports. Just imagine the madness of what I've just described. So there's a massive economic cost, which then has a downstream effect on job creation and the ability for businesses to reinvest capital into, and all of this is represented. And so, yes, the conversation is narrowed down to VAT, but it's a really tough thing that VAT, in my mind, is a symptom of a sick system.
And do you think that these opposition parties have effectively been led down the primrose path, that the ANC will actually pull the rug from under them? Do you think that's the plan?
They've already started, right? So ASA announced to the world on Tuesday that they were successful in scrapping VAT and income tax. And the minister said yesterday in his speech in Parliament that those things were just a recommendation that will be considered. And by last night, there was an official government tweet saying the main takeaways from yesterday's budget vote is that there will be a 0.5% VAT increase this year and another one next year. So it's not that they, are being led astray. They have been led astray. One of the things I've heard coming out of these smaller camps is that we didn't engage with them, and that's why they did. One, I don't think that's quite accurate. But two, I've been thinking about is in fact not the most generous way of thinking about it, but if I were to be a bit clinical for a moment, neither neglect or abuse is good. But if you had to pick, I think you would pick neglect. And we just didn't take a smaller party that serious, apart from the fact that we assumed that they would do the right thing for South Africa and not increase VAT. If we happen to not dial them in their estimation in time, it's simply because they're below the margin of error. And we might have neglected them in the process, which I'm not saying we did. But the ANC actively abused these guys. They told them you're getting this, and within a day, they reneged on that promise. The only test for South Africans is, does VAT go up on the 1st of May?
Yeah.
Discovery has already announced VAT is going up on the 1st of May with 0.5%. So if Action SA was so successful, why is this being announced?
Yeah.
And it's not just Discovery. Everybody now knows that come the 1st of May, unless there's a court challenge that succeeds, that is what's happening. And if the court challenge succeeds, it'll be because we've opposed it on constitutional grounds, not because of Action SA, coming up with a flimsy recommendation in a committee meeting. Yeah, so they've been abused, and it's almost like they've been taken for a ride that it seems that we've been taken on for. For 8 or 9 months. We at least went into that soberly, knowing what we're dealing with, and with a concerted effort trying to chip away concessions.
Yeah.
Whereas Action SA have just blindly stumbled into this. There's a lot of thoughts in there on like the individuals involved, but that's I think what's happened here.
You've spent a lot of time clearly looking at the economy, looking at the fiscal position in which we find ourselves. Let's assume for a moment that perfectly rational beings with the best interests of the country sat around a table. What are you saying at that table that we need to do to get ourselves out of this economic rut, and maybe in the medium to long term on a real growth trajectory? Because we all know we could be there. We could be at 5. We could be at 10 if we did things wisely and with agility. How do we get there?
Oh, so many thoughts. But in a lot of ways, it's an economics 101 lecture. Some of these things aren't rocket science to figure out. I would say, again, back to my earlier point of deep optimism.
Yeah.
Under Mbeki, this economy grew sometimes 5 to 6% a year.
Yeah.
It was the boom years.
Yeah.
This thing was taking off.
Yeah.
That's within us. We can do it. It's the Mbeki government's budget is, multiple governments have called multiple years budgets, but somewhere between 50 to 60% of the current budget, if you take that amount and you inflation adjust it, which is the process of, making it the same money. So if you say in 2025 money, those budgets were 50 to 60% of this budget. Sure. And the Mandela budget in 95 was a third of this budget, inflation adjusted. But if I speak to anybody, engaging them on their thoughts, they'd say to me, it just felt like Mandela and Mbeki were trying to do more for South Africa than government now is able to do for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we are in a place where we are very inefficiently spending public money. And I think you start there. I think you say this is the mechanism we have to serve society, and it has to be a lot more efficient than it is now. We've got evidence to tell us that it used to be a lot more efficient. I'm not saying it was perfectly efficient, but it was a lot more efficient than it is now. And so much brokenness, to capture all of it in one term, so much brokenness has crept into the system.
Yeah.
Because there's two areas there. It's one that if you're spending as inefficient as a government, you have to extract, as we've explained earlier, that money from society or from the bond market. And that has the effect of taking money out of the economy. So every rand that somebody spends on tax, they're not able to spend on building a house or doing something else of lasting value. But there's another problem, which is when we fund these government departments that have bureaucratic sprawl, they get in the way of things just getting done. Now you have to apply for this permit, and then you have to get that licensing, and often that also comes with some backhanded deal. You can't get stuff done because these government departments that's funded it with public money, its only job is compliance, and that compliance often goes broken, and the compliance takes the form of bribery and all sorts of bad. So you have this knock-on effect of sprawling bureaucracy that that says, well, that it's actually getting in the way of industry. It's getting in the way of society advancing and reinvesting excess cash. So for me, it all starts actually at the budget. It sounds so academic and boring, but if we fix that, if we start saying, no, I'm sorry, your Transnet catered contract is simply not as important as people getting slightly better off year and being able to get good education and decent housing. Those things are more important to us. And shout as much as you want, go ad hominem as much as you want. We don't care. That's the issue. It is at least at a societal level the most important tool we've got.